So welcome everyone to the fourth of 5 weeks of our Lenten Program on Laudato Si. Tonight's theme is integral ecology. I've asked Mirabella to read the acknowledgement of country.
Okay. As a parish, let us acknowledge that the Uyghur people of the Darabal Nation are the traditional custodians who have walked upon and cared for this land for thousands of years. We acknowledge their continued deep spiritual attachment and relationship to their county and seek to learn more about how to walk lightly and use wisely the natural resources and diverse animal life that Mother Earth nourishes. We commit ourselves in prayer and action to the ongoing journey of reconciliation and care for our common home.
If people would get their booklets out to that second page, we'll read together the Canticle of Creation as our prayer. Is there anybody not able to see a prayer? Okay, that's the right page. Yes, looks like that. Keep turning backwards or forwards, John. Fran, have you got one on the page? Okay. Together, O Most High, all-powerful, good Lord God, to you belong praise, glory, honour and all blessing. Be praised, my Lord, for all your creation, and especially for our brother Sun, who brings us the day and the light. He is strong and shines magnificently. O Lord, we think of you when we look at him. Be praised, my Lord, for Sister Moon and for all stars, which you have set shining and lovely in the heavens. Be praised, my Lord, for our brothers wind and air, and every kind of weather, by which you, Lord, uphold life in all your creatures. Be praised, my Lord, for Sister Water, who is very useful to us, and humble, precious, and pure. Be praised, my Lord, for Brother Fire, through whom you give us light in the darkness. He is bright and lively and strong. Be praised, my Lord, for Sister Earth, our Mother, who nourishes us and sustains us, bringing forth fruits and vegetables of many kinds and flowers of many colours. Be praised, my Lord, for those who forgive the love of you, Lord, and for those who bear sickness and weakness in peace and patience. You will grant them a crown. Be praised, my Lord, for our sister Death, whom we must all face. I praise and bless you, Lord, and I give thanks to you, and I will serve you in all humility. So the first task I thought we might do is to go through in our books to chapter 3. The first page of it looks like that. I struggle a bit with it, but the page numbers are on some pages up the top, and it is the page after page 14. Okay. No, it's not chapter 3, it's chapter 4. Sorry. It looks like this. And it's after page 18. Let's do this activity. Thanks. Okay. So one of the reasons the social justice group put together this Lenten program was to ensure that we became more familiar with the writings of the church in terms of its social teaching. So it's really important that we go off and think about how this happens in our daily lives. It's really important that we think about how we can impact things, and there'll be a lot of that tonight. But I wanted just to reinforce the importance of listening to the words, the very words that the Pope and all his team have put together for this encyclical. So I'm going back to the task of asking people just to read a paragraph at the time. I'll start probably with John and paragraph 137, and we'll just work our way around the group.
Let's turn our attention now to understanding more fully what integral ecology is in its human and social dimensions.
Ecology is the study of the relationship between living things and the environment in which they live and grow.
This leads, of course, to considering the conditions required for life. Everything in such a study is interconnected, as one organism affecting the next. Even the smallest things, such as atoms and subatomic particles, are connected with everything else.
When we speak of the environment, we refer to the relationship between nature and the community of creatures that live in it. We are not outside of nature looking in. We are in nature, and nature is in us. To understand pollution, for example, one must understand who lives in the polluted area and how they behave.
Our goal is to move to a sustainable use of natural resources, one in which each organism in the ecosystem, no matter how small, is able to sustain itself and regenerate.
We urgently need a humanism capable of bringing together the different fields of knowledge, including economics, and in the service of a more integral and integrating vision.
Likewise, a social ecology would also contribute to the connection between the environment and various institutions, such as governments, and the degrading of nature. Having laws on the books to protect forests does not mean, for example, that the government will enforce them if the government in question ignores lawbreakers who ravage woodlands.
Turn over the page, Fran.
Ecology also involves protecting the historic and artistic culture of a people. When solutions are being sought for ecological problems, local people and their culture should be consulted with an eye to what they can contribute.
Consumerism tends to level culture because everything is uniform. Our care for the world must match the flexibility and dynamism of local cultures. The loss of a local culture in which people have found identity and meaning, often for centuries, is as bad as losing a species of plant or animal.
So there you go. Hence the need to respect indigenous communities. When large developments, mining or agricultural projects are being considered, the indigenous communities should be the primary voice in the planning.
Another factor to consider in development decisions is the place where people live their daily lives. If it becomes crowded, noisy, polluted, or dangerous, humans suffer.
The poor, living in the worst of conditions, often show a remarkable ability to find contentment and happiness. They build support systems, community, and mutual care in the midst of great adversity. Such human ecology is admirable, but such areas can also be breeding places for brutality, criminal activity, and great sadness. Still, love can overpower hate and often does. Those who manage neighbourhoods should take all of this into account as part of a program of ecology.
Urban planners to practice good ecology when they plan transportation, services and open areas for all to use. Housing is an element of this. Owning or having a home is a large part of human dignity. In places where shanty towns have emerged, planners should develop those areas while retaining those neighbourhoods as much as possible. Likewise, urban transportation systems must be considered part of the solution, ones in which pollution is reduced and ease of use increased.
And finally, we pay attention to the rural poor who often work without rights, property or hope.
A final element of the human ecology is our bodies. Our bodies connect with nature in very direct, daily ways. Accepting our bodies as God's gift is essential. We do not have absolute and final control over our bodies, and thinking we do leads to thinking we also have such power over all nature. Learning to love who we are in our masculinity and femininity makes us able to love more fully.
So you're turning over 1 and a bit pages, and there's only 3 more paragraphs to go, and it's under the heading, the principle of the common good. So Fran, paragraph 156.
Having just considered human ecology in all its dimensions, we turn now to the common good, which is the shared situation in which we all live and the way in which that gives us a sense of well-being and fulfilment. First and foremost, we respect the rights and dignity that belong to each of us, whether we live alone or in families. Second, social peace is a major factor in the common good and is based on distributive justice. In today's world, the principle of common good becomes a call for solidarity with the poor throughout the world.
Future generations also have a stake in this conversation when we speak of the common good. We must consider the world we leave behind us. The world is a gift and we share it with others, including those who come after us. So we must ask, what do you want your children to inherit from us? This question shapes our behaviour and speaks to meaning and purpose in life.
Frank, if you finish off.
We have already consumed and wasted so many of the Earth's resources, stretching the planet's ability to provide for us and leaving behind piles of debris and filth, that we must take decisive action now if we are truly to leave behind a world worthy of human life. But we have also had a simultaneous decline in will. Modern men and women can be individualistic, self-centred and focused on immediate gratification. Parents pass these new values on to their children. We cannot think about the next generation because we have a hard time being generous to each other. And in this situation, the poor are left out completely.
Thank you. As Frank said earlier in his session, isn't it amazing to think that they're the words that are coming to us through formal teaching of the Catholic Church? They might be words that we think about all of the time. They might be words that we've heard activists or politicians or whatever say. Often we discount those, but they are the words of the formal teaching of the Church. Integral ecology is an interesting concept that I think pushes environmentalism to a new plane, to a new dimension, and that is always thinking about the human element, always thinking about the social element, always thinking about the cultural element. What I'm going to ask you to do for 5 minutes is just to talk among yourselves, just in twos if you like, whoever you're sharing the book with, and identify one of those paragraphs or one of those sentences that really struck home to you that is incredibly challenging, or is incredibly uplifting, or is something you hadn't thought of. Now mine is paragraph 140. Because if this is my goal, or our goal, it's going to call for a fundamental rethink about how I or how we live. Right, our goal is to move to a sustainable use of resources, and I'd like to throw in there animals, plants, other people, and other organisms, not just natural resources, one in which each organism, plant, animal, person, in the ecosystem, no matter how small or poor or distant or different, is able to sustain themselves and regenerate. So that's, to me, that's one of the strongest and most challenging statements, I think, in this document. Are we being called by the Pope to live a life such that our measured and careful use of resources and interactions with plants and animals and other people enables every one of them, no matter how small, how poor, how distant, how different, to sustain themselves and regenerate? I just find that a bit earth-shattering. It was one thing to give up Lindt chocolate and have to go and buy Aldi chocolate because it's fair trade. Do you know what I mean? That hurt because I'm a Lindt girl, right? But you know, what's the Pope asking us to do here? Not to give up our homes, our cars, our clothes. I don't know. It's to me, that grabbed me the very first time I read this whole thing through. So when you turn to the person beside you, I guess my challenge is, what do you think the Pope is, the Church? I don't mind whether you think about it as the Pope or the Church. What is the Church calling us to do as authentic Catholics in this space? And are we up for it? Because there's a part of me that kind of thinks, thank goodness my kids have grown up. Thank goodness I have time. Thank goodness I have money. I can do without plastics because I have the time to do without plastics. Do you know what I mean? I can use public transport because I've got time, right? All my kids have gone, all the grandkids are rushing in, but you know, so almost everybody in this room that's in my age group, and Chris, you might be one of the few who's not quite in our age groups, we're through that really tough period of our lives. We're in a more contemplative period where it possibly shouldn't be too hard to take this on. So if you just turn to one or two people near you where you can see those texts, and what is the Church or the Pope asking? Oh yes, but in terms of my schedule, we've got 4 group activities at any time, and it's here. So I've got
I looked out for you before.
If it's you, anybody will be surprised.
Yes. So should we actually
what Tony said in the very first presentation.
during Lent?
That Jesus says, love God, my commandment, love each other in the way that I love you. Thinking that love was all about and love and respect and kindness and fairness and so on. I think to other people, I try to, it's a new call to me to continue increasing in my mind. So this is news for me. And it's a big
It's interesting you spent some time in the Aboriginal areas. Is that right? See, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? For the Aboriginal. You can't get away. That's what sort of comes to mind. It's the nearest I could quickly find is that they're given a taboo on the skin. And it's told there's a certain animal that you would plant every person that you so you'd be more given taboo. This is interesting in the world. So knowledge that you didn't have the right to every nature different.
I'm going to bring this session to a close for a minute. I've chosen a case study for tonight. It's based on a comment John made in the very first session when he worried that if we did something and intervened in one of these systems where things are going amok, you know, poor people may not have jobs. So I'm going to look at the textiles industry, right? Everybody has on their seat a sheet called Beyond the Op Shop. Now, you're welcome to take that home. That's a print from a magazine I subscribe to called Renew. I'm going to just get some paragraphs out of that read. And then we've got some complementary video to look at. So just looking at the understanding of the textile industry from soil to soil, right, the whole bits. But this article kind of sets the scene for Australia because most of the information in here relates to Australia. So I'm reading the second paragraph. Australians consume 27 kilograms of clothing and textiles each year, twice the global average, 13 kilos, and second highest between the US, 37, and Europe, 22. Okay, fair enough. The shocking sentence. Of that 27 kilos, 23 end up in landfill. End up in landfill. So for every 27 kilos, each individual in Australia consumes, and where, remember this is an average, right, 23 end up in landfill. As we learned from the ABC's War on Waste, Australia ditches 6 tonnes of clothing every 10 minutes. Every year, 500,000 tonnes go to the dump, and just under 100,000 tonnes are exported. And of course, some of those countries don't want our exports anymore, which is quite interesting. I'm jumping down now again to the section called How Are Textiles Recycled? The classic way that the Australians recycle textile, and you'll all smile at this because you're all responsible for this one, is to shove them in a donation bin or drop them off at the op shop. Now, what do we know about what we drop off at the op shop? According to the Salvation Army, only 3 or 4% of what gets dropped off is usable for resale or to giving to people in need in the community in which that shop is. Most of it's exported for sale or donated as international aid. And again, there's a growing backlash there from developing countries. Low quality items are converted into rags, which really means they only get used once and then thrown out, because the way you create those rags, you cut up the pieces, they're used once and thrown out, so they're not recycled. 5 to 10%, and 30% is used for biofuels, pellets, or industrial uses, or sent to landfill. Sadly, 16% of clothing donations are in such poor condition that they're only good for the tip. And charities' tip fees are $13 million a year. So our behaviour is costing our charities, not benefiting them, right? And it's interesting, somewhere else in this article, if you follow up and read it, basically says, somewhere it says, only give to the op shop what you would wear yourself. What was that? I know, and I think a lot more people are becoming more cognizant of it. Okay, I'm turning the page and I'm jumping down to about the second or third paragraph. The global clothing industry consumes 93 billion cubic metres of fresh water annually, enough for 5 million people, and produces 20% of the world's waste water. Making a simple pair of jeans or a cotton t-shirt consumes about 3,000 to 40,000 litres of water, depending on which country you're in or how you count it, plus 3 kilos of chemicals. So any jeans that you wear, 3 kilos of chemicals making those jeans.
Some people even want them torn anyway.
Now, the 4th largest lake in the world in the 60s is now almost dry because of the re-diverting of that water for cotton farming. We know a little bit of that in Australia about our cotton farms not sitting in our high rainfall, monsoonal places, but sitting in our dry Murray-Darling region. Okay, don't think cotton's bad. A polyester t-shirt, 5.5 kilos of CO2 equivalent, and a cotton one 2.1 kilos. Right? So, other synthetic products, I'm looking at the second last paragraph in the first column now, is the microfibres and the microplastics that come. I'm sure you're all aware, but most synthetic material is made of petrol. Petrol's products and byproducts, oil. Okay, so when it degrades, it doesn't biodegrade. When it degrades and breaks down, it creates these things called microfibres. Up to 2,000 fibres per wash. Every time we put our washing machine on with clothes in it, at least 2,000 fibres end up going down the tube. Right? Now, how many loads of wash would we all do? And how much microplastics, microfibres are ending up in our water?
It's interesting about top loading and front loading washing machines. They said that
the top loading washing machine is much more aggressive in how it bangs the clothes around, and therefore more fibres come out. Is that, Philip, what you're saying? Yes. And front loading are much more gentle and less micros. There's an amazing, this is an aside, but there's an amazing scientist at the University of New South Wales called Emma Johnson, and her laboratory is full of washing machines, don't tell a Vice-Chancellor, and she is trying to work out how you filter those microfibres and microplastics out. So she's got about 10 PhD students working on it. And I don't doubt that within time there'll be a technological solution, at least in terms of washing.
The front loading ones use much less water as well.
Yes, yes. Okay. So thinking about Pope Francis's notion of integral ecology, there's also a high human cost associated with fabric and clothing. You all know the Bangladesh story of the fire in the building where the doors were locked, right? A form of slavery, right? Most of our garment workers in our developing countries work in slave-like conditions. But there's unregulated chemicals affecting cotton workers' health in India. There's forced child labour in manufacturing in Argentina and Turkey, and high rates of sexual abuse in clothing factories in Lesotho. So there is that human side of the supply chain as well. And for those of you that are aware of the work this parish is doing around making us more aware of anti-slavery and human trafficking, there is a law that has been passed by Parliament but not put into operation because it would cost the government too much to check all of its supply chains and change some of it. It's not without cost for business to redo their supply chains. Okay, so the most important thing about this particular article is the tips for a better textile lifestyle. So it's right up the top on the second page in this. So read the rest of the article if you like. But what I'd like you to do now is read down that list and just get a sense of, can I engage with that idea? Can I do that? And Imelda, you might be saying, tick, I already do that. Tick, I already do that. Tick, I already do that. Maybe I don't do that. Do you know what I mean? Most of us here could be well down the track, but that's quite an interesting list of some of the things that we could do. So I'm just going to give you a moment or two to have a look at that list and then turn to the people beside you and discuss what you think is achievable in that list in terms of what you can do.
when I walked it a couple of weeks ago, Christ, lifesaving. So we had to quickly wash them, hang them out, a couple of hours later, and we're again the next day. It's really easy to say, right? It breathes pretty well. But I didn't realise we were washing it. And then I got my socks back, all the socks, and socks are not particularly so tight. They wash them much more. Woolen socks turn into basically children's size socks. So some of the natural
used to turn my colours. From the slave trade. Even yourself, there's no possibility of buying and there's still there. Wow. They didn't know it. And they didn't know it. They stopped
it's threadbare. If I blow on it, it's too crusty for nothing.
It's not a personal conversation, there's issues with cotton. In one sense, it sounds dramatic. And then the other one, then you look at polyesters and those microfibers, you think, okay, they're worse than the ones into the cotton we know has a place in the wetlands around it. This can actually good for the environment and response. But if you, because you're going to drain out a lot of water and apply to the proper areas where
that's right, you've got to grow it in the right place. It's a natural role. Controlling that waterways. It ends up being consuming it. Who knows what sort of health impacts it's having?
I think one of the fascinating things and it doesn't look concerned. Depending on what the price is. And then some people won't send it back.
We've got a few people online, and one that didn't fit, somebody else was selling something second-hand.
Some companies work out that people realize it's not the right size or something.
Oh, right.
I bought a shirt 3 years ago. It came in the collars all open. And they said, oh, we'll send it out.
And what happened to the other ones? You've got to find someone similar size. This shirt might fit you.
When it's brand new.
Oh, there you go.
If someone wants a massive collar.
I'm going to bring that conversation to...
Something out of the 70s, was it?
Yeah, correct. It's like someone has just got the double the measurements on the collar.
I would love to see this.
Okay, we might stop there.
It was very easy.
Just pointing out, on the very back page of your thing, on the day that I was printing this off at home, I was reading the Sydney Morning Herald, and here is an article talking about workers, garment workers in Myanmar, trying to work out during the coup, right? But also about trying to convince fashion houses to have better working conditions. So asking the fashion brands to put pressure on things that are going on there. And I'm not suggesting that we can do anything personally about that, but it's... Yes. Well, And that's true in South Africa, that was true in Iran. It was the poorer people, and that's what the Pope says over and over again. Every time you look at one of these actions and reactions, more often than not, it's the poorer people that suffer the most. So I just want to come back here to this notion of the integral ecology about the cultural, the social and the environmental, because I think the textile industry is really good at thinking about that. I think many of us have thought through various things we can do on the personal level, right? I think one of the key messages of the actual document is the most important thing we can do is lower our levels of consumption, right? There's no point in sorting out recycling if you're going to continue to buy and buy and buy and buy, because those products are going to have to be made, whether they're made with recycled materials or made from fresh. So how do you address the whole issue of consumerism? And I thought there was a lovely one in this list somewhere about having a longer relationship with your clothes, caring for them. And I was telling my mum that we were doing this session tonight, and she said, remember when I bought you your one skirt from Fletcher Jones the year you started work? One skirt, it was reversible, so I could get, do you know what I mean? It's not that many decades ago, you know, when we had really long relationships with our clothes. Probably, they cost us a fortune. They were better made. A lot of them were made at home because that's what most people could afford to do, was buy the material and do it. Fashions had longer cycles. You know?
These days it's too quick. Like the young ones, they will go and buy T-shirts from Target, Kmart, when it was so cheap. One wear and a bit of a stain and they just throw it out.
Yes.
And I know that.
Yes, and again in this article, if you read it in your own time, it's pointing out how short that cycle is now between people buying and throwing out. Okay.
I was very impressed with Lisa Overton's things that friendly environmental tips for Lenten. One of them was for the kids to think about the water to produce your T-shirt, and how about we just reshare our clothing. It was a really nice little tip, and other things that she said.
So that gets to this one, right? Because we can all think about this. The amount of clothes sharing, most of you know about street book libraries, right? You know about book fairs, you know about the Uniting Church down in Wollongong will take any book you ever want to give it, right? And they run all these lending libraries and book fairs. But what can we do at a community level around the textiles industry? Can we think about how we share clothes? Now, just with COVID at the moment, I'm not recommending anybody does it, but can we think about it? And one of the things that my daughter-in-law threw up in a really interesting conversation is every time a Catholic school changes its uniform, how much is wasted and how much more is purchased, right, in terms of, you know, the cycle. So is there something we, and by community I mean parish, right, but I also left community there because St Vincent de Paul, we could all probably look at our practices there a bit, you know, how we use them. These two are complicated. I'm going to just put a line through there. Another daughter, so daughter one who brought up the thing about clothes, she's a climate scientist, so I get a bit done in by my young women in my family. This particular one works with Indigenous communities and the big mining companies, Rio Tinto and BHP and stuff. And she was saying, you know, when you talk to people now about the environment and about ecology and about all of these things, they're saying businesses are the people who are going to drive it. Right? They're going to drive it because it makes business sense now, even if it's just reputational risk, and even if it's just the pressure of activist shareholders. But they're also going to drive it because they're close enough to the industry to be competent in working out the new business case. Right? Where governments sometimes are much more clumsy and use a much more blunt instrument, you know, as they tried to use with car manufacturing when they were trying to raise it. So just thinking about what's our relationship with fashion houses. And I'm going to show a video, and we'll end tonight on this video. You know fair trade chocolates? You know fair trade teas?
Yes.
Do we? Yes, forgot that. Fair trade tea. We're also now moving into fair trade clothing. And there'll be some interesting bits there that we can look about in terms of business. So Chris has very kindly brought his screen along. Now, because it goes too long, we're going to watch 5 minutes, speed up, and then watch 5 minutes. So start from the beginning. And again, this is trying to get at the social side. This is not about cotton and the problems it causes in the environment. It's about the people that work.
I don't think it's about what was behind this government, how things have actually worked behind this.
If farmer is not there, there is no cloth. Without cotton, I don't know how the supply chain is surviving.
Textile supply chain is huge. I am trying to make it as sustainable and as win-win and as enjoyable as possible.
मैं प्राउड फील करती हूं, मैं 4 बच्ची को संभाल पाई.
Man muss Kleidung nicht so herstellen, dass irgendwie Natur und Mensch darunter leidet, sondern man kann eben darauf achten, dass beide geschützt werden. Es gibt eigentlich keine Entschuldigung, das nicht zu machen oder Fairtrade oder Bioproduktion nicht zu unterstützen.
Mainly for the production of the cotton, I connect with the farmers. We have 800 members in our farmers producer company, and this company is 100% owned by the small producers. Vegetables or meal, they cook with some farm waste, that stick or whatever. They are very much connected with nature. We sell most of the cotton into fair trade plus organic. Farmers like to do organic because they want to support nature. They understand their situations of the water, soil fertility. For the organic requirement is minimum because inputs they grow in farm itself. There is a number of beneficiary insects in the fields. Maybe you heard that there are a number of farmers are suicide, particularly cotton farmers. And what is the reason? The reason is the maybe price or their debts or their more expense they put for the agriculture, and not getting proper production, no support. In fair trade, they have surety of the price, technical guidance, decrease their input cost, and that is one. you take the example for this year, there is a drought situations. Some farmers do not getting even single kilo of the grain or kilo of the cotton from the farms. So what our board member have decided to support those farmers, and how we can support. We have some reserve surplus in our producer company account. We are working with that and we support it to survive even in kind of these situations. The system which is for family and happiness will become. This only.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why did they say that they don't use genetically modified plants? Because they run with less water than the normal ones, or allegedly.
Yeah, so maybe one of the reasons is that they genetically modify them so that they're not killed by the pesticides that the like companies like Monsanto will provide. So you buy the crop, but it costs you a lot more because you pay extra for the genetically modified seed, and then you have to pay extra for the pesticides and other chemicals that the firm will sell to you.
I thought Monsanto was the, well, perhaps I don't understand Monsanto's business anymore. I thought that they use less water and they don't need as much to sell.
Maybe that's true.
John, in theory, genetic modification plays a big part in increasing crops.
That's right.
Crop effectiveness. There's a really dark side to that, and some of it's about the behaviours of the monopolies. For example, one farmer next door doing organic farming beside a genetically modified farm. One seed comes across, that seed is found in the organic farmers, that farmer's taken to court, right, and sued. Look, there's a dark side to it. But that's true of all technology, isn't it? All technology, when used wisely and fairly, has a place, and all technology can be used wrongly or too much. But anyway, look, we might.
If you want it.
What was that?
I'm streaming through my phone now.
Okay, well, let's just try another minute or two and see if we've got a.
कैसे भी चल सकते हो, ठीक है? गोले गोले में चल सकते हो या एकदम ऐसे criss cross.
The textile industry is actually the second largest employer in India after agriculture. And so you can imagine the number of farmers and workers who are involved in this sector. When you have a large number of workers here, especially when you have women, there are difficulties which they could face, which could be discrimination, sexual harassment at the workplace, or getting unequal pay, or not being able to actually voice their opinion when they have a problem. Frederick believes in people first. I don't come in with, okay, this is the standard and this is how you need to get certified. Now, what we have in between is the support program, and that's where I play an important role. And I really like doing that because I feel that that is where you are helping each factory, each mill to sort of build a better working environment.
There are women who've come back and say, like, after attending a couple of trainings, we're much more confident now, we are able to communicate better. If there is some problem, we are the first ones to come forward and voice our grievance. You are indirectly or directly sort of building confidence, building self-esteem in workers. Once that happens, the whole working environment, the working space sort of changes. And at the same time, if you're working with the management to set things right, then there are real wonders that can happen in factories. I mean, I've seen places where, you know, the culture has completely changed. People are really willing to work there for many years, and they say that what we like about this place is we get a lot of respect here.
So the rest of the video then goes on to, so the growing part, fair trade's working on the growing part, our work with farmers to ensure that they get a fair price, right? It's working with the textile makers, not the garment makers, but the textile makers and the garment makers to some extent in terms of working conditions, right? And then the second half of the video is a range of fashion houses that are trying to do their best around their supply chain and around recycling, looking at how they're doing that work. It's interesting, on the back of your sheet that you are taking home, there are some URLs, not this one, this one's fair trade.
It's called fair trade, is it?
Yes, fair trade clothes. But of course I sent you the email. Would you like the URL? Video up on the board. But there's a number here. Now I looked at them and I didn't recognise a single label. Right. However, I sent the list off to somebody under 30, and they did recognise you know, some of the labels. But the clothes were twice the price. Right? They're twice the price. If you're paying for natural fibres, you're paying for a good supply chain where the farmer gets a reasonable price. We know this with dairy, don't we? That when Woolies and Coles brought the price of milk down to that dollar price, the people got screwed with the farmers, right? So one of the whole issues of the really cheap, fast fashion is that it only works if you're doing the wrong thing along the supply chain. So I think the final paragraphs in this article, I thought, were good. It's talking about Australia, and a lot of this article is very critical of Australia because we don't have recycling, we don't have frameworks, we don't have regulations, where Europe is way ahead of us in terms of all of this, it says. And with COVID, of course, there's a whole pile of things that have fallen apart anyway. And I don't know that I've had my microphone on. I am sorry. It could be that post-COVID is Australia's grand opportunity to focus on the changes that are desperately needed to make sustainable textile industry from soil to soil. We must remove toxic substances and microfibres from the supply chain and replace them with renewable and natural materials. We must transform clothing design to improve reuse and recycling. And we need to dramatically improve our collection and reprocessing capabilities. The last paragraph comes back to us, and in terms of our personal efforts, the quickest impact we can have is by radically reducing our consumption. Clothing and textiles are discretionary items, and we must start using our discretion. So it's part of a theme of all of the weeks, but I thought if I picked an area that, like textiles, to look at, you know, it might give you some insights.
We do have some personal responsibility.
Yes, and I think the 10 tips, I thought they were very good, right? And most of us probably could tick a few of them off, but there's a few more there that I think that you could think about. Repairing, I don't know. Again, I'm past that stage. where I was raising 3 kids and working, 70 hours a week. I never repaired an item in that whole time. Occasionally my mum would repair. I can repair now. It's a privilege. I've got time. I've got time to repair. But so how do we help our children and our grandchildren?
Little sewing corners in Westfield or in Cronulla where you can take things to be repaired or...
Yes.
Do you need money for that, though?
Oh yeah, but from our point of view,
yes.
At least we're not wasting it.
Yes, but that notion of a long-term relationship with your clothes, clothes of nature.
Your shoes sold in Hegel does cost money, but you're not going out to buy another pair of shoes.
So I think...
Someone cheap company work here.
Yeah.
But depending on the item, you sometimes, for a lot of people, it's a lot cheaper than you buy a new item. Than just to get it repaired. We do that even with local TV. Every 4 or 5 years, people just, it's not worth the money to get it repaired, so you shut it out and you buy a new one.
You go to the electrical recycle, which is next weekend for the Shire, and hundreds of cars line up with all this stuff.
Yes. And our consumer laws are so weak. There's a phrase called fit for purpose, right? So if you buy a refrigerator, it only lasts 2 years and it breaks down irretrievably, so it cannot be repaired at a cost lower than its original purpose price. You go to the tribunal about it. You're in court for not court, but you're in the process for more than 12 months to have that declared a not fit for purpose. That designed obsolescence is all a part of it. Okay, in terms of, Philip, if it's okay if we skip the hymn, because trying to get people out in 2 minutes, right? Here's my 2 reflections from the words out of the document. Paragraph 222, which might be something that Philip touches on next week, I don't know. Christian spirituality proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of life. So, our spirituality proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of our life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of deep enjoyment, free from the obsession of consumption. And I think that's really interesting. And it's really hard for me to stand here because I keep saying I'm at that stage in my life where I can do that. I didn't do it when I was rushing around with kids and jobs and all of those types of things. I bought my way out of issues. But it's interesting talking to the 3 next generations and the grandchildren in my family about that, not getting very far with the grandchildren.
Can I ask a question there on that? I know you stir on these things, but in China we have an emerging middle class who are getting wealthier. If you went back 20 years, they were all in poverty or dire straits, and they're all demanding things too. So there's a growth of demand for consumerism in the poorer countries of the world as they develop.
Start to bring their people up. I use China as a specific example. And that's the thing that worries me a wee bit. And the fact that the world population is increasing at enormous rates. Between the years 1950 and 1970, you can check this on Google too, 2 billion people was the increase. In 1900, the world population was less than 2 billion, and now it's 7.5.
But if you go back to what the Pope has said very early in this document, the 2 things is, don't blame overpopulation. It's only a small part of the total problem. And do remember that less than 10% of the people who live on this world consume 80% of all resources. He also says at another point in the encyclical, do not expect the developing countries to carry the extra burden when we ourselves as developed countries have lived off the fat of the land for so long. So I agree with what you're saying, John, but what the Pope is doing is challenging you to say they are not a good enough excuse to do nothing. We need to think about how our spirituality leads us to a point where consumption is not the equivalence of the quality of life. Right? So, we won't have a hymn.
Excuse me, why?
This
is supposed to be a Lenten Program.
I'm going to.
We finish with anything.
I thought we would finish with a prayer, which we could all read.
It would only be a couple of minutes.
I did promise the organisers that we'd keep each session to an hour and a quarter. That's the only reason, Imelda. If nobody's going to mind about an extra 5 minutes.
No, nobody finds. I don't mind. Nobody finds it. No, of course.
You wouldn't be game enough, would you, after that?
We have to hear.
I was singing that creation song again.
Yes. While he's getting...
All right, the pressure's on, Philip.
But we will also say a common prayer afterwards.
Oh, yeah, prayer.
Yeah.
I had the song.
What page is the prayer?
It's dangerous to have the words in front of you, Frank. You'll want to sing.
No, the words in the song.
Can't sing.
No, this is a new song.
It's a new song.
Called Sing Out, Earth and Skies.
You'll have to keep that steady because... Come, O God of all the earth, come to us, O righteous one. Come and bring our love to birth in the glory of your Son. Sing out, earth and skies, sing of the God who loves you. Raise your joyful cries, dance to the life around you. Come, O God of wind and ray flame, fill the earth with righteousness. Teach us all to sing your name. May our lives your love confess. Sing out, earth and skies, sing of the God who loves you. Raise your joyful cries, dance to the life around you. Joyful cries, dance to the life around you.
Oh, very good.
Okay.
This page, and we'll all pray together. It's right at the back. It's called a Christian Prayer in Union with Creation. Together. Father, we praise you with all your creatures. They came forth
from your powerful hand. They are yours, filled with your presence and your tender love. Praise be to you. Son of God, Jesus, through all things were made. You were formed in the womb of Mary our mother. You became part of this earth, and you gazed upon this world with human eyes. Today you are alive in every creature, in your risen glory. Praise be to you. Holy Spirit, by your light, you guide this world towards the Father's love, and accompany creation as it grows into travail. You also dwell in our hearts, and you inspire us to do what is good. Praise be to you. Triune God, wondrous community of infinite love, teach us to contemplate you in the beauty of the universe. All things speak of you. Awaken our praise and thankfulness for every being that you have made. Give us the grace to feel profoundly joined to everything that is. God of love, show us our place in this world as channels of your love. Of all the creatures of this earth, for not one of them is forgotten in your sight. Enlighten those who possess power and money, that they may avoid the sin of indifference, that they may love the common good, advance the weak, and care for this world in which we live. The poor and the earth are crying out, O Lord, seize us with your power and might. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty.
Praise be to you. Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, custodian. Thank you.
Very
Hello, your